Hello, nice of you to be here. Today we're doing something a little different. So far I've only shared some of my attempts at growing food. And today I want to show you that you don't necessarily have to grow some of your food. You can also forage for it, and I guess that's what I'm going to share in this video. You can see it's quite obvious what we're going to be going for. This is a hawthorn bush, which is absolutely completely packed in an abundance of hawthorn berries. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've never harvested and used these berries ever before. I've thought about it many times, but I figured why not share what I'm going to try and do with these berries, is harvest them and then process them, share that in the video, and who knows, maybe you might learn a thing or two, as will I. Right, hawthorns, there's several different species, and none of them are native to New Zealand, but nonetheless they are around, and they are part of the hedge along the road. We're close to where we're staying, so we didn't have to forage far to go forage, I guess. So yeah, you could identify the species by the leaf, probably, and the berry size, but they also hybridize freely, so the question really is how accurate that identification would be. Nonetheless, this is definitely a hawthorn. I'm 100% sure about that. And as I said, there's an abundance of berries. You can tell that they're ripe, the berries, when you can easily squish them between your fingers. And this is what it looks like. And they are part of the rose family. So, and if you eat it, it kind of tastes a little bit like an apple, if you really try. So rose family is apples, but also rose hips, almonds, whatnot. It's a huge family, and they're in the same family. Here we are in the kitchen, and I've divided the hawthorn harvest, the ones that I foraged yesterday, into 3 different containers. Well, 2.5, I guess, because this is a small one, and this is the first recipe that I want to share. It's the simplest one, and it's not really even a recipe, that's why I said 2.5. But yeah, I'm going to put these hawthorns in the solar dehydrator and simply dehydrate them, and then have them use them for a tea or other kind of medicinal aspects. Besides those 2 things, I've divided the hawthorns pretty much equally over these 2 containers, and I'm going to be using plums, which we have in abundance as well. I have a whole bucket full of those, to make 2 different things with the hawthorns. First, we'll put them together in a pan and simmer it down and make a jam, add some sugar, and then strain it, because they still have the seeds and some of the stems on there. And then I'll be doing the same thing for these. I'll be adding some plums. I'll probably put them through the food processor first and blend it all up, add a bit of water and make a mash out of it, and then strain it through this to get the base for the fruit leather, and then divide some of that mush over a plate, a dehydration plate for in the dehydrator, but then do some in the oven as well, because there's not enough space in there. I'll show you the progress as we go. First up, the hawthorn jam. As you can see, I put the hawthorns and the plums, which I cut in half and remove the pits. I put it into a pan. I would say they are about 50-50 equals in weight, but I didn't really measure it, and I'm not really a measure recipe kind of a person. Then we add some sugar. Again, not really measured in any way or form, just a nice heap full of sugar added to the mix. We'll simply taste the jam as we go along, and if it needs some more sugar, we can always add that. Then I'll bring the fruit to a boiling point quickly, and then after that let it simmer for a while. This is what it looks like after about 10 minutes of simmering. And we used plums in this case because we had heaps of plums around, but you could use any kind of fruit that you have locally available or that you can get heaps of. Another great thing to mention about the hawthorns is that they're very high in pectin, and pectin is the substance that you use to bind your jellies and your jams so they become less runny, less liquid, and more of a set substance. This is then what it looks like after about an hour of simmering. The juices have reduced considerably and the jam is ready to go into the pots. One way you can make sure your jam has set properly so that it's not liquid once it cools down is to use the frozen plate set test. I don't know if that's the name, but that's what you can use, which is basically you put a plate in the freezer and then you scoop a little bit of your jam on the plate so it cools down quickly. You can then judge whether the jam is still too runny or if it's set properly already. Once you're satisfied with the consistency of your jam, it's time to put them in containers so they can be stored. In my case, I reused some glass jars which we had lying around, and a simple way of disinfecting them is by pouring some boiling hot water into them as well as onto the lids, and then quickly after that filling them with the jam itself. So then the hot jars are sterile or close to sterile, as well as the jam, which is still hot because it came straight off the stove. You pour it into the jars, and then one added benefit of using the hot jars and the hot jam is that you can twist on the lids and then you flip them upside down and they'll press out all the oxygen, all the air, which basically means that your jam is now stored in an airtight, in a vacuum sealed container and should last for quite some time. For the third and final recipe, which is the Hawthorn fruit leather, I started off with the plums, which similar to the jam, which I cut up in halves and I took out the pits. I then added those to a food processor to blend them to make it into a pulp. That pulp I then added to the hawthorns, and after that I added some sugar. This is where I made one of the mistakes. I should have squished the hawthorns before adding the plum pulp because it became quite messy and quite difficult to get all of them done. Nonetheless, all of them were squeezed and it made a nice thick pulpy substance of the hawthorn and the plums together, which I then sieved to get rid of all the hawthorn seeds that were still in there. The liquid that was then left over is the stuff that I made the fruit leather of, and I did so by putting a thin layer on a piece of baking paper on several different trays. I tried to put them in the oven, but the dehydration function of the oven wasn't as effective as I'd hoped, so therefore I put it in our solar dehydrator, which was very effective, and within a day the fruit leather was completely dehydrated in the solar dehydrator and was looking good and pretty much ready to eat. Hopefully this was useful to you, or at least it provides you some inspiration to have a go at some of the hawthorns yourself. There's plenty of different other ways to use hawthorns. They're a very versatile fruit and they're quite abundant on the trees, as you can see at this point in time. As always, thank you for watching and hopefully see you next time.